Hello, I'm Spencer Blackwelder. It's my pleasure to host this program, which is presented by Atheists United as a public service to the community. Our focus will be on the teaching of good values, good ethics, and the development of good character in children from their earliest years. One of the questions I am asked a lot is, how do you atheists teach your children ethics and values without the use of religion and the Bible as a guide? Well, there are lots of good books available to us now, books that teach self-confidence, self-esteem, and a lot of qualities that are not taught in the Bible. An excellent book was brought to my attention recently. It's called They're Never Too Young for Books. It's a pleasure to have as my guests this morning Miss Edythe McGovern and Ms. Helen Muller.
Hi.
Ms. McGovern, would you tell us...
Let's be less formal. Let me call you Spencer, and you may call me Edythe, if you will.
Count me in.
That's a deal. Then it'll be Edythe, Helen, and Spencer. Why don't you give us an overview of, or rather some background on yourselves and your book. Edythe, would you like to start first?
Well, I'm a teacher, and when I was teaching a course in children's literature at Valley College back in 1976, and there was no textbook, so I wrote one. That was the first edition of They're Never Too Young for Books. And then Helen was a librarian and came over and talked to my students about the newest children's books in the library, and that's how we got acquainted, and we've been friends ever since.
Indeed we have. And I had been a children's librarian since the early 1950s and decided a year ago last January that it was time to retire. Edythe, as she said, had been my good friend for some time, but that didn't mean that she was going to let me rest. At my retirement party, she said, I have a new project for you. And that's how we got started on working together on the revision of They're Never Too Young for Books.
Well, I'm sure a lot of folks will avail themselves of your book. But for now, can you give us a crash course on how to pick and use stories to teach the ethics and values that we want to impart to our children?
Well, first of all, you have to be very sly. You have to use humor, and you have to have books that have within them, within the story, the idea that you want to impart to the children.
And then, you can use conversation to get into important ideas. You can use stories as springboards to start the conversations that you want to have with a child. You also want stories that have all the qualities of any good story, stories that will hold the reader or the listener's interest, good characters, role models, or perhaps examples of how not to be, an exciting plot, and ideas that will speak to a child's heart and mind.
Well, now, can you give us some examples of how to do that? A lot of parents are not articulate and certainly couldn't make up their own stories. So give us some examples of concepts and ideas and how you can use stories to lead into situations that will be relative to the child's personal situation.
Well, for example, let's say you have a small child who's having difficulty tying his shoes. Instead of just saying, you can do it, keep trying, you use a little book like this, which is The Little Engine That Could by Watty Piper, and the little engine is the least likely, but it manages to get the big engine pushed over the hill. I know I can, I know I can, I know I can, and she does.
Or children need to understand the importance of community, of working together. In Leo Leone's beautifully illustrated story of Swimmy, the big, fierce fish gobble up the small ones. Swimmy's plan is for all the small fish to swim in formation. Together they will look like the biggest fish in the sea. Many little ones together can equal one big bully. And we can do things together that we could never do by ourselves.
Or, for example, we have a book like Ferdinand, the story of Ferdinand by Monroe Leaf, which gets over the idea that it's okay to be what you are and to be true to yourself. This is a bull who does not want to engage in bullfighting, and so he frustrates the macho matador and comes back to his own little cork tree, sits under the cork tree, and smells the flowers. That's what he wants to do. And his mother is very satisfied with his being himself.
That's a wonderful mother. Do you know, sometimes even adults can learn by reading children's books.
You're right.
Beatrix Potter wrote a book called The Tale of Peter Rabbit. Children must learn that their actions do have consequences. Peter disobeys his mother. He goes into someone else's garden and he eats his vegetables. Peter's very lucky. He escapes with only the loss of his best jacket and a good scare. Children learn from this story that it's wrong to take someone else's property.
And when you talk about consequences, probably a very common occurrence would be children who tell fibs. This is a little boy in The Big, Fat, Enormous Lie by Marjorie Charmot. This little boy who empties the cookie jar, and then he tells his mother and father, no, he didn't do it. Well, the big, fat, enormous lie takes the shape of a big green thing, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and finally he has to confess, and then it deflates, just like sticking a pin in a balloon. He's learned his lesson.
Well, now, you know, those books are all very good there. You've taught perseverance, community, working together, confidence in yourself, and, of course, the consequences of being naughty like Peter Rabbit. But when do you start children first learning to read? Some people say it's a mistake to push them into reading before they're ready.
Well, they shouldn't be pushed into reading before they're ready. Our book is not the idea, doesn't have the idea of teaching children to read, not at all. It just gives them some pre-ideas about books and reading, which leads into it later.
Oh, and reading to a child is such a warm, shared experience. And children do learn. It expands their vocabulary. The marvelous artwork in children's picture books. For example, in Peter Rabbit, the charming original illustrations by Beatrix Potter provide aesthetic experiences for them. And then sometimes they learn things that to an adult may seem obvious. Oh, for instance, in English, we read from left to right. In other languages or other cultures, they read from the top to the bottom, or perhaps even from right to left.
You know, what you're saying here reminds me of imprinting with an animal. You take a horse, for instance, when it is first born, just a little baby, and you massage its ear and inside its mouth and rub its hooves and all the body parts that you're going to work on later. It's called imprinting because you're teaching it not to object to working on those parts at a later date. But let us say, for instance, you imprint the right ear when he's a baby, just born, but you don't touch the left ear. Later on, when you try to work on the right ear, there's no objection. But if you touch the left ear, he'll jump out of his skin.
Is that so?
So you're doing somewhat the same thing with children. You're exposing them to books from the time they're in the crib, making it pleasurable so that reading comes automatically as they get older and they like it.
Exactly.
That's the idea.
But what can we tell our children when they come home and they ask us about God, heaven, and hell? A lot of the things that their little friends learn in Sunday school, but things we don't agree with.
You mean like the world was created in 6 days?
Yes, that's not an honest example.
No, it isn't a very good idea. We have other ways of explaining these kinds of things to children. There are books like the one that Helen has here, How Life on Earth Began.
And this particular book is a geological survey of the formation of the earth, not millions of years ago, but billions of years ago.
Or you have a book like Virginia Lee Burton's Life Story, which also does the same kind of thing. She uses drama as a metaphor, and goes through the world as it was formed and as people undoubtedly evolved over millions of years. So you have a scientific explanation.
Yes, that's beginning science.
It certainly is. Factual information, and there are books of this kind, not only on evolution, but in all other areas of science. Books written for the youngest child in the simplest terms.
I like that. That's groundwork for science classes in school later on. But atheists have a problem with those religionists who think that they have the one true religion, and they want everyone else to accept their deity, their rules and regulations, like a theocracy. But we don't live in a theocracy. We live in a democracy with a lot of different cultures, a lot of different belief systems, and we want our children to learn to appreciate and fit into a diverse society.
Well, certainly you have a book like Leo Leone's Little Blue and Little Yellow. What he does in here is to personify the colors as though they were little children. And as little children, they hug each other. And lo and behold, a new color, green, which is very desirable.
Oh, today we have books picturing children from every cultural, ethnic, racial group. It's one of the most exciting things that I've seen during my career as a children's librarian. This wealth of books with children from diverse backgrounds engaging in activities that would be common to any child's experience. For example, Ezra Jack Keats' book, The Snowy Day. In this book, Peter, a little African-American boy, plays in the snow and enjoys it as any child would.
And I'm getting a real appreciation for the tremendous amount of literature that is available for teaching ethics and values, all the right qualities and characteristics that are necessary to make one a good person. But I would have trouble choosing which book to read, you know. I would have trouble with that.
Well, that's one of the reasons that we'd like you to try They're Never Too Young for Books. It has over 1,500 titles under more than 50 divisions. And each title has a little thing, a little statement about the book, a little review of it, if you like, tell you all about it, so that you can get a little guidance to helping to choose.
Well and good, but what if I don't have your book?
Well, then you might go to your local library to get professional advice. Use your library. Even your youngest toddler is welcome there.
Well, there's some books people would want to buy to help their child or grandchildren establish a library at home, but books are expensive. What's the best way to do that?
Well, the best way to do that is to get acquainted with a wide range of books. Borrow them from the library, and then you'll soon see which ones you want to buy.
Okay, and so the ones that have been most successful you buy. Well, the
Exactly.
Bible tells us that the female was put on earth to be subordinate to and serve the male. In effect, the male could use the female like his personal property, but that's no longer acceptable. You know, I wasn't married very long before I found out about that. I was getting dressed for a business appointment one morning, and I discovered that my shirts had not been ironed. I didn't have a shirt available. So I was angry and frustrated because I was running late. So in an inopportune moment, I blurted out to my wife, "Look, Liz, if you're not going to have my shirts ironed on time, let me know and I'll iron them myself." Well, for about 40 years, I've been ironing shirts.
You do it very well.
Yes, indeed. No, actually limiting people to roles by their sexes, it's very bad for both boys and girls. There's a very interesting book here, Max, by Rachel Isadora, in which a little boy discovers that it is fun to be a ballet dancer. He takes his little sister to the ballet class, and he enjoys it immensely. He finds that it is not an occupation only for girls.
Or there's a charming book, William's Doll, by Charlotte Zolotaw. In this book, William's parents have bought him all of the typical boy toys. He plays with them, but William keeps saying that what he really wants is a baby doll. His grandmother understands, and she buys him one, saying he will grow up to be a parent too.
Well, now that's interesting because the little boy plays with dolls, and he learns to be a father in the same manner that the little girl plays with dolls and learns to be a mother.
That's
But
right.
children have to deal with divorce a lot these days. Is there any literature that helps them handle that?
Oh, yes. There's a whole section in the book on divorce, books that deal with divorce. Actually, this is very painful for most children of any age. And so we like a book called The Dinosaur's Divorce, in which they remove the pain a little bit by having all of the problems and solutions devolve upon little green dinosaurs. It's a little less painful for the child that way.
And also we hear a lot about family values, what the ideal family is supposed to be like. 2 parents of opposite sexes, 2 and a third children. But you know, there are a lot of different models now. There are a lot of single-parent families.
There certainly are, and there are children's books that reflect this. For instance, in I Speak English from My Mom by Meryl Stanek, this is a story of a warm, happy, functional, one-parent family. When Loopy was little, her mother did everything for her. Now, Loopy must help her mother, who does not speak English. This makes her feel very important and grown up. And Loopy's mother decides that she will take classes in English so that she can get a better job.
And that's an important story because that little girl has a vital function in that family, which is certainly good for her self-esteem and ego.
That's right.
But one of the most difficult things to talk to children about is death. How do we help children understand and accept the fact of death?
Well, you can usually lead into death the conversation about it, especially if it's happened in the child's own experience in her own life. This is a very good book, Annie and the Old One by Miska Miles. It's about a little girl whose grandmother, she's a little Navajo girl, and she and her grandmother are very close. However, the grandmother knows that she's growing old and she's going to die, and the little girl doesn't want to accept this. But her grandmother finally explains that death is part of the cycle of life, and at the end, the little girl does understand and accept the idea of death.
Or Judith Bjorst has done a very useful book called The 10th Good Thing About Barney. In this book, the boy's cat has died, a common experience in childhood. His little friend suggests that maybe the cat has gone to heaven, but the little boy doesn't think so. To help him feel better, his mother says, "Why don't you try and think of 10 good things about Barney?" 9 are easy. And then he thinks of the 10th one. Barney is buried in the rose garden where he will help the flowers to grow. It's important in books of this kind that you be absolutely honest. The little boy says, "I don't like it that Barney has died." And his father says, "Well, why should you? It's very sad."
Well, now that story points up a lesson that I learned about truthfulness with children. When one of my little boys was about so high, I forget how old he was, but he had a pet bird, and his bird was killed accidentally. So I said to him, "Let's take the bird to the rose garden and we'll bury him there so that he can go to heaven." Now, to say that was a mistake, as I learned later. It certainly didn't fit the atheist philosophy of rational answers and truthfulness with children. But anyway, we took the bird to the rose garden and buried him so he could go to heaven. And I forgot all about it. Then a few days later, we were eating lunch, and he said, "Dad, that bird we put out in the rose garden is not going to heaven." I said, "Yeah, how do you know?" He said, "Because I went out and dug him up, and he's still out there."
Smart boy.
But then I praised him for thinking for himself and not accepting what I had said just because I had said it, but doing his own investigating. You see, atheists don't accept authority uncritically, and we think that children should feel confident enough to question authority whenever it's appropriate.
Right.
A good role model for that behavior might be the intrepid Madeline in Madeline's Rescue by Ludwig Bemelman. In this book, Madeline, one of 12 little girls in a French boarding school, refuses to allow the dog that had saved her life to be turned out. And she climbs up on the chair and she defies Lord Cuckoo Face, the school director. Madeline prevails.
Well, learning to get along with others is so important, especially when you're different, and not being intimidated by the fact that you're maybe very, very different from everyone else.
Well, diversity is very important. Here, for instance, in this book, Amazing Grace by Mary Hoffman, there's a little girl who loves to act. And when the school play is announced as being Peter Pan, she wants to be Peter Pan. Oh, no, the other kids don't think so because, first of all, she's a girl, and second of all, she's black. But she perseveres, and with the help of her mother and her grandmother, she does do an amazing job. Very, very good job.
Well, now that's good. These new books reflect what is going on in our society today, and they really can help children cope with our new varied society.
That's right.
And very often, children have to deal with feelings. Sibling rivalry is a big issue. This is a warm, reassuring book, On Mother's Lap, by Anne Herbert Scott. And this book shows the little boy who's afraid that there won't be room on Mother's lap for him after his new sister is born. Oh, but there is, and it feels so good. Or a birthday for Francis. Nothing is more exciting and special to a child than celebrating their birthday. In this book by Russell Hobain, it's not Francis's birthday. She must help to celebrate her younger sister Gloria's birthday. It's very hard to be an unbirthday child, but Francis does cope. You have to do that sometimes, and of course, her turn will come.
The sharing is very important. It's certainly something we want to teach our children. In Two Greedy Bears by Mira Ginsburg, two adorable little bears are constantly trying to one-up each other, and they're not going to share a thing until finally, at the end, a very clever fox shows them the advantages of sharing.
Well, since we atheists don't expect God or Jesus to take care of us, that means taking responsibility for ourselves. We have to be capable, we have to be self-sufficient. In short, we have to be responsible for our own behavior.
That's right. And in a very old folk tale, the Little Red Hen would like her friends to help her to bake her cake, but they're not going to. They're all very lazy. So she does it herself, and she is successful in so doing. Or in another very beautiful African folk tale called Mufero's Beautiful Daughters, gorgeous illustrations here by the author, and that is the reteller, John Steptoe. You can see they're absolutely beautiful examples of, it tells about two daughters, and one is evil and is punished, and one is good and is rewarded.
Yes, and it's important to teach that we have to care for each other.
Oh, it certainly is. We want to teach our children compassion. One of my favorite stories is a very old fable, Androcles and the Lion. Androcles was a Roman slave, and he had escaped into the woods. He comes upon a lion who's in great pain, and though he's in an urgent need to hurry, he stops to take the thorn from the lion's paw. Androcles is captured. For entertainment, the Romans threw captured slaves into the arena to be eaten by the wild animals. Well, when Androcles is thrown into the arena, the animal that he finds there is the lion that he had helped. Of course, he wasn't eaten. One good turn deserves another.
Well, a lot of people think atheists don't have holidays, too. But we like to celebrate holidays, and particularly seasonal celebrations. like
Yes.
winter and summer solstice, for instance.
Right, and I think that, for instance, we always will find every culture celebrates the time of the harvest. There's a very cute little book here, Alligator Arrived with Apples, in which each animal comes to a feast, which turns out to be a Thanksgiving feast, and brings a foodstuff that goes with his name. For instance, there's mocha mousse made by Mouse, or noodles from Nick of Naples, and so on through the alphabet. So at the end, they all come and they celebrate Thanksgiving.
And spring is a time of new beginnings. There's a lovely little story for the very youngest child, The Carrot Seed by Ruth Krauss. In this book, the little boy has planted a seed and he tends it carefully, and in the end, the carrot grows, and that's a wonderful beginning.
Well, we could spend endless hours learning about the great literature that has been created for us by talented and dedicated writers and illustrators. You've been a tremendous help for such a short time. But how do we remember all this valuable information?
Well, if you look in the book, you will find, and they're never too young for books, books on every subject you can think about. Problems, solutions, death, anything.
Well, thank you, Edythe McGovern and Helen Muller, for sharing your expertise with us on this Atheists United Education TV series. Perhaps you'll return again sometime and tell us about adult literature that we adults can use.
I'd certainly like to.
Until next time, I am Spencer Blackwelder for Atheists United. If you have any questions or comments about the program or about Atheists United, write to us at the address printed on the bottom of the screen. Atheists United, Box 5329, Sherman Oaks, California, area code 91413, or zip code rather, 91413, or call us at 818-763-8567.